If someone told me that a smile could cost half a lifetime's savings, I would have laughed. But the day I met Dylan Cole, I learned that charm can be the most expensive currency of all. The first time I saw him was at a local fundraiser for small business owners in Willow Creek, one of those cheerful community events where everyone's pretending not to be broke. I was 30, restless, and still clutching a dream that had survived too many maybe laters. For years, I'd saved every dollar from my job as a pastry chef, planning to open a small cafe, Kate's Corner. I could already see it: sunlight through lace curtains, the smell of cinnamon rolls, laughter from regulars who felt like family. It wasn't just a business, it was the life I wanted to build after losing my mother, the only person who'd ever believed I could. That night, Dylan stood by the coffee stand, chatting easily with everyone, his confidence radiating like a warm light in the chilly autumn air. He wore that effortless kind of charm, not too polished, not too casual. When our eyes met, he smiled as if we'd known each other for years. "Let me guess," he said, handing me a cup. "You're the kind of woman who adds a dash of nutmeg to her coffee." I laughed. "Only on special occasions." "Well," he grinned, "today's one of them." That's how it started. A joke, a smile, a cup of coffee I didn't know would change everything. Dylan told me he'd just moved back to town after working in investment development. Vague enough to sound impressive, but not suspicious. He asked about my plans, and when I mentioned my cafe dream, his eyes lit up. "You know," he said, "I've helped a few small businesses get started. Maybe I could give you some pointers." The next week, we met again. Then again. He had this way of making me feel seen, not as some small town girl with flour on her apron, but as a woman with ambition. He listened. He remembered things I said. He showed up when no one else did. When he offered to help with my business plan, it felt like fate. He reviewed my numbers, made a few suggestions, and before I knew it, we were talking about becoming partners. "You've got the heart," he said, "and I've got the head. Together, we could make something beautiful." He said it with such conviction that I believed him. Within 2 months, we were looking at rental spaces downtown. Dylan handled the lease negotiations, assuring me it would be easier with one name on the paperwork. "Don't worry, Katie," he said, his hand brushing mine. "It's just legal stuff. You'll always be the soul of this place." Something inside me hesitated. My mother's voice echoed faintly. "Never sign what you don't read. Never trust too easily." But I told myself it was just fear talking. Dylan had been nothing but kind, supportive, patient. When the cafe finally opened, the entire town showed up. Kate's Corner was everything I'd imagined: soft jazz, warm pastries, handwritten chalkboard menus. Customers lined up for my croissants. People took selfies by the window. I remember standing behind the counter, watching Dylan hand out flyers and thinking, maybe this is how happiness looks. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "We did it." I smiled. "Yeah, we really did." If only I'd looked closer at the receipt that came with that moment. The invisible cost of trusting the wrong person. Because in that same month, while I was perfecting my recipes, Dylan was perfecting his plan. When the cafe opened its doors for the first time, it felt like a sunrise after a long, cold night. Customers filled the air with laughter, the scent of fresh pastries drifted out onto Main Street, and for the first time in years, I felt proud. Like maybe, just maybe, I'd made something real. Dylan was everywhere, greeting customers, fixing the music playlist, charming the suppliers. He had that energy people gravitated toward, the kind that made you believe he could handle anything. He's a keeper, my friend Marcy told me one morning as we wiped tables after the morning rush. Yeah, I said with a small smile. He really is. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Within a few weeks, Dylan began to talk more about expansion, about smart money. We're doing great, Katie, he said one evening as we closed up. But we could do better. We could franchise this thing. Just imagine Kate's Corner in every small town across the state. I laughed. Slow down, Mr. Rockefeller. We've barely made rent. He winked. That's what I'm here for. He always said things like that. Simple, confident, convincing. It was comforting to have someone who seemed to know exactly what to do. When he mentioned that having his name alone on the business registration would make bank dealing smoother, I hesitated. It's just red tape, he said, waving a hand. Investors prefer one signatory. We'll add you later once the paperwork settles. He said it so casually I almost felt silly for doubting him. After all, I saw every sale, every customer, every order that came through. I didn't notice the numbers that didn't reach the shared spreadsheet, or the extra account he'd quietly opened for operations. Still, little things began to feel off. One Friday, a supplier called asking about a late payment. Dylan brushed it off. Just a mix-up. Another day, a regular customer mentioned seeing him at a restaurant in the city, whining and dining some investors. I didn't think much of it. He was always networking. That's what partners did, right? But the first real crack appeared when I tried to access our business account to order new equipment. The password didn't work. I asked Dylan about it, and he smiled. That same easy smile that once made me melt. Oh, the bank updated the security system, he said. I'll send you the new login later. He never did. Instead, he showed up the next morning with flowers and a new espresso machine, saying it was a gift for our success. And just like that, my doubts softened again. Because that's what manipulation feels like. Not cruelty, but comfort right after the sting. Then came the dinner with potential investors. He invited me to join, dressed in his sharp gray suit that made him look every bit the businessman he pretended to be. At the restaurant, he introduced me as the creative genius behind Kate's Corner, while he handled all the financial talk. The men around the table laughed, toasted, and made promises about big money. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I caught a glimpse of Dylan through the glass, leaning close to one of the investors, whispering, his expression serious. For the first time, I didn't recognize him. That night, as we drove home, I asked, "What did you two talk about?" He paused. "Just numbers. You wouldn't be interested." Something cold settled in my chest. "Try me," he sighed, tapping the steering wheel. "Katie, don't start. You're too emotional about business. Let me handle it." Too emotional. That phrase stuck like a thorn. The next few weeks blurred together. Dylan became distant. Shorter texts, later nights, vague excuses. He claimed he was negotiating better supplier deals and arranging future partnerships. Meanwhile, I handled the cafe alone, exhausted but still clinging to the dream. Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. He was in the back office, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, the paperwork's under my name," he said quietly. "She's just the face of the brand. Don't worry, she won't cause trouble." I froze. Every sound in the cafe faded. The espresso machine, the chatter, even the music. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He ended the call, smiling as he walked out, unaware that I'd heard. And in that moment, the world tilted just a little, like a cup knocked off the edge of a table. Not broken yet, but falling fast. That night, I sat alone in the darkened cafe, staring at the chalkboard menu I'd written by hand. Underneath the words, Kate's Corner, I whispered, maybe it was never mine. It started small. Most disasters do. One morning, a supplier called asking about a second overdue invoice. I frowned, checking the payment records on my laptop. Everything looked right, at least the parts I could see. When I asked Dylan, he waved it off with his usual easy charm. Just a clerical mix-up, he said. I'll handle it. And like always, I let it go. But soon there were more mix-ups. A missing delivery here, a sudden cash shortage there. Every time I asked questions, Dylan had an answer. Smooth, logical, impossible to argue with. Then came the first real argument. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet except for the hum of the espresso machine. I was tallying up sales from the weekend when I noticed a $5,000 withdrawal marked miscellaneous expenses. What's this? I asked, holding the printout. He barely looked up from his phone. Business cost, equipment maintenance. We don't even have equipment worth $5,000, I said, my voice sharper than I meant. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. Katie, I told you to let me handle the financial side. You focus on baking. I'll keep the book straight. It's called division of labor. That phrase, it made me feel small, like I was a child interrupting an adult's conversation. Still, something in me refused to shrink. I deserve to know where our money's going, I said quietly. He smiled then, that perfect, disarming smile I'd once loved. And you will, but right now, trust me. I did. Against my better judgment, I did. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us thickened. He started spending less time at the cafe, claiming he was meeting investors or handling logistics. Sometimes he wouldn't answer my calls for hours. When he did, he sounded distracted, detached, like a man with better things to do. One evening, I stopped by the cafe after closing to grab my phone charger and found him inside, talking to a stranger. They both went silent the moment I walked in. Didn't expect you back, Dylan said quickly. Just business talk. The stranger nodded and left, avoiding my eyes. That night, Dylan didn't come home. The next morning, he arrived late, looking tired but smug. Late night? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Meetings ran long, he said. You'd be surprised how hard I'm working to keep this place alive. But something in his tone, half defense, half accusation, made my stomach twist. I started double-checking our records when he wasn't around. Some transactions had been deleted, others renamed. Our balance had quietly dropped by more than $15,000 in 2 months. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, but deep down, I already knew. Still, I tried to talk to him again. Dylan, please, just show me the statements. If everything's fine, prove it. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. You don't trust me? I did, but you're making it really hard. For the first time, his face hardened. You're being paranoid. This attitude, this lack of faith, it's toxic, Katie. The word toxic hit me like a slap. After that, things changed fast. He stopped sharing updates entirely. My name disappeared from the company email signature, then from the online listings. When I asked why, he said, rebranding makes things simpler. But the worst moment came 2 weeks later. I went to the bank to deposit our weekend earnings, only to find the account had been frozen. Only the registered owner can authorize deposits, the teller explained. Registered owner? I repeated, confused. That's me. I co-own the business. She checked the screen. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's listed solely under a Mr. Dylan Cole. For a long second, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I left the building, the paper bag of cash still in my grip. Outside, the wind carried the smell of roasted coffee from our cafe down the street. My cafe, or at least I thought it was. I walked past the window and saw him inside, laughing with customers as if nothing had happened. And that's when it hit me. He hadn't stolen from me all at once. He'd done it slowly, gently, so I'd mistake the bleeding for growing pains. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at our partnership agreement, reading and rereading every line. My name wasn't there, not once. Somewhere between the third cup of coffee and dawn, I whispered, "He took everything." But I was wrong. He hadn't taken everything yet. And the morning everything fell apart looked perfectly ordinary. The sun was warm, the street smelled of fresh bread from the bakery across the road, and I was carrying a tray of muffins for the cafe's display case. I remember humming under my breath, a small, stubborn attempt at normalcy. Then I saw the lock. It was new. Silver, shiny, wrong. At first, I thought there'd been a mistake. I tried my key again, jiggling it like always. Nothing. I knocked the door, peered through the window, and froze. The chalkboard menu was gone. The photos from the wall, the ones I'd taken myself, had been replaced. And above the counter, where Kate's Corner used to hang, there was only a blank space. A man in a delivery uniform passed by and frowned. "They changin' owners?" he asked casually. I don't know, I stammered. I called Dylan. Straight to voicemail. I called again, then again. By the fifth call, I stopped counting. Something inside me cracked. I ran to the back entrance, locked too. The same new silver padlock. Through the back window, I could just make out our espresso machine, the one we'd bought together. My handwriting still clung to the small, freshly baked today sign on the counter. Everything else looked different, as if the life I'd built had been quietly repainted overnight. By noon, panic had hardened into disbelief. I drove to Dylan's apartment, empty. His clothes, gone. Drawers pulled out, the bed stripped bare. Only a single coffee mug on the counter. The one I'd given him last Christmas, printed with, "Trust me, I'm a genius." I sank to the floor and laughed, a small, broken sound. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The clerk, the same woman from before, avoided my eyes as she told me that the cafe's account had been closed by the sole owner's request. "I'm sorry, Miss Turner," she said gently. "It looks like all associated funds were transferred 2 days ago." 2 days. He'd been planning it while still smiling across the counter at me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour, staring at the crumpled printout of the account statement. The last transaction was a withdrawal of nearly everything we had left. That night, I went back to the cafe one last time. The streetlights cast long shadows across the front windows. Through the glass, I saw a stranger wiping the counter. When I knocked, he opened the door halfway. "Sorry, ma'am," he said politely. "We're closed for renovations." "Renovations?" I whispered. He hesitated, then added, "New owner bought the place this week." I stepped back. The world tilted slightly like a camera pulled out of focus. "Do you know who bought it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He glanced at a paper on the counter. Cole Investments. Dylan's name, his signature, his victory. The next morning, I filed a police report. They told me it was a civil matter. "You'll need a lawyer," the officer said, handing me a brochure. "It's tricky without a written contract." I nodded, numb. In the weeks that followed, I tried everything. Emails, letters, even calling his family. No one knew where he'd gone, or maybe they did and didn't want to say. My savings were gone. My business was gone. My name erased. One evening, I walked past the cafe again. The sign above the door now read, "The Willow Bean." The lights glowed warm and golden inside. People laughed. Music played. It looked almost the same, except I wasn't in it. I stood there for a long time, the smell of roasted coffee drifting through the open door. That smell used to mean comfort. Now it just smelled like loss. When I finally turned away, the wind was sharp against my face. For the first time since Dylan disappeared, I whispered his name out loud. And I made a promise not to find him, but to make sure he'd never do this to anyone else again. The days after Dylan vanished blurred into something I can only describe as gray noise. Mornings bled into nights, and I moved through them like a ghost, half awake, half broken. At first, I told myself it was a nightmare, a cruel trick that would unravel once I found the right number to call. But the more I tried, the more the silence answered back. His phone disconnected, email deactivated, social media wiped clean. He'd erased himself, and me along with him. The cafe had been everything. My purpose, my proof that I could build something out of nothing. Without it, I didn't know what to do when I woke up, or why I should. I stayed in my small apartment for days, the curtains drawn. The smell of coffee grounds clung to my clothes, a ghost of the life I'd lost. I tried baking again, hoping the rhythm of kneading dough might calm me. It didn't. Every time I opened the oven, I saw his smile. The way he'd stand behind me, pretending to taste test the frosting, laughing as if we were a team. Friends stopped calling, not out of cruelty, but because I'd become unbearable company. "You need to move on," Marcy told me once. "He's gone. The money's gone. You've got to start over." Start over. As if it were that easy. Debt collectors began to call next. Dylan had left unpaid invoices in my name, vendors, utility bills, even a lease guarantee I'd signed without realizing. Each letter was another reminder of how deeply I'd trusted him. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor one night, surrounded by stacks of overdue notices, my phone lighting up with calls I couldn't answer. I'd never felt so stupid or so angry. But anger was still a luxury I couldn't afford. Grief came first. The kind that didn't make you cry, but hollowed you out instead. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. I was working a temporary job as a waitress at a diner 2 towns over, just to keep the lights on. It was a slow day, the kind where the coffee burns and time crawls. A couple walked in, well-dressed, smiling, and I froze. On the woman's wrist was a gold bracelet I recognized instantly. Dylan had given me the same one on my birthday. The inscription inside was unmistakable: "To new beginnings." I forced a smile as I took their order. When the man turned his head, I nearly dropped the coffee pot. It wasn't Dylan, but sitting beside him was a woman I'd seen in a photo on his old Facebook page. She'd been a former partner in one of his previous ventures. I remembered the caption, "Wishing her the best as she moves on." That night, I went home and searched her name online. It took hours, but I found her. And what I found made my stomach twist. A small news article 3 years old. Local entrepreneur accused of defrauding investors. Case settled out of court. The man's name in the report, Dylan Cole. I read every word, each one like a knife. The pattern was always the same: charm, partnership, promises, money. Then the disappearance. He'd done this before. The next day, I called the reporter who'd written the piece. She told me something that stuck. "You're not the first," she said softly. And you probably won't be the last unless someone stops him. That sentence lit a spark I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something quieter, steadier, a slow, deliberate anger that warmed instead of burned. When I hung up, I looked around my empty apartment. At the boxes, the unpaid bills, the silence, and for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. If Dylan Cole thought he could disappear without consequence, he was wrong. He'd built his fortune on women like me, women who trusted too much and questioned too late. But this time, he'd chosen the wrong woman. Revenge didn't arrive like thunder, it came quietly, the way a small flame catches at the edge of a page. I started with the only thing I had left: questions. Who else had he done this to? Where had he gone? How did no one stop him before? I spent nights hunched over my old laptop, scrolling through every article, post, and business listing that mentioned Dylan Cole. His trail was faint, but it was there. A string of dissolved LLCs, deleted websites, and cheerful photos of grand openings that vanished a few months later. Every business followed the same rhythm: quick success, quick exit. Some of the old links led me to names of his partners. I began reaching out, one email at a time. Most never replied. But one night, a message arrived. Her name was Laura Jensen, and she knew exactly who I was. Dylan used me too, her message read. If you're serious about taking him down, we should talk. We met in a small cafe off the interstate. I expected bitterness. What I found was exhaustion. Laura looked like someone who'd rebuilt herself twice already. I lost everything, she said. My boutique, my savings. He used my name to take out loans, then disappeared. She pulled a folder from her purse. Bank statements, contracts, emails. Proof. Police said it was a civil dispute. I didn't have the money to fight it. I told her my story. She listened, then nodded. He's careful. Changes his address every few months. But he always uses the same pattern. Small towns, women with good credit and bad luck. We decided to compare notes. Between her documents and my old files, we found overlap. Same suppliers, same fake business consultant signature. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a blueprint. For the first time since he vanished, I felt something close to clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the only one. We started tracing financial records, digging through archived filings. I spent evenings on public records websites, learning how to read incorporation forms, following his paper trail. He'd opened a new company 6 months after leaving me, under a slightly different name, DC Holdings. Laura frowned when she saw it. That's him. I'd bet anything. We needed proof. Something undeniable. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I found it. A photo tagged at a grand opening of a cafe in another town. There he was, Dylan, standing beside a sleek new sign that read Bean Theory, his arm around a younger woman. She looked happy. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once. That poor girl, Laura whispered when she saw the picture. Not for long, I said. Over the next few weeks, we gathered everything: printouts, screenshots, email headers, public filings. I contacted the old reporter again. She remembered Dylan immediately. You've got evidence? She asked. More than he'll ever expect. Then build your case carefully. Guys like that know how to play innocent. I did. Each night I spread papers across my kitchen table, connecting dots with red marker lines like something out of a detective show. But this wasn't about drama. It was about control. The one thing he'd taken from me that I could reclaim. One evening, while organizing documents, Laura said quietly, "You know, most people would just try to move on." "I tried," I said. "It didn't work." I wasn't just chasing money anymore. I wanted justice. Not the courtroom kind, but the kind that restores balance. When I finally found the name of the bank handling his new venture, I smiled for the first time in months. If Dylan wanted to play businessman again, I'd play investor, the kind he'd never forget. That night, I created a new email address under a fake name. A confident, polished entrepreneur looking to partner with DC Holdings. Within 2 days, he replied, "Wonderful to hear from you. Let's set up a meeting." I stared at his message, my pulse steady, not shaking for the first time in a long time. He had no idea who was writing back. I created her in a single night. The woman Dylan would never suspect. Her name was Clara Benson. She was confident, independent, and carried the kind of ambition that men like Dylan couldn't resist. I set up a polished LinkedIn page, a small business website, and even a few photos, all carefully curated from royalty-free stock images and slight digital edits. Clara was everything I wasn't anymore. Shiny, trusting, full of promise. Our first call was over video. When Dylan's face appeared on the screen, my breath caught. He looked exactly the same. That same charming grin, that same smooth tone that had once made me believe in things like us and forever. But this time, I wasn't the girl who fell for it. I was the woman holding the knife behind the curtain. "Clara," he said warmly, "I've heard great things about your work. You're exactly the kind of partner we're looking for." His voice was velvet, too easy, too practiced. I smiled. "Likewise, I've been following DC Holdings for a while. Seems like you've built something impressive." He nodded, pleased. The conversation flowed effortlessly. He bragged about his strategic vision, his commitment to empowering women in business. The irony nearly made me laugh. When the call ended, he suggested we meet in person, just to discuss investment options. He sent me the address of a co-working space in a nearby city. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I rehearsed. Every question, every smile. I'd waited months for this. When I walked into the building 2 days later, I was ready. My hair was different, shorter, darker. I wore glasses, a tailored jacket, heels that clicked sharply against the floor. Dylan greeted me with open arms, the perfect gentleman. If he recognized me, he hid it well. But I could tell he didn't. His eyes scanned me with interest, not memory. We talked for an hour. He laid out plans for expansion, franchising, capital growth, all smoke and mirrors. But I kept him talking, asking about the numbers, the structure, the previous partners. He slipped up more than once. At one point, he mentioned a former associate who'd caused him a trouble. My pulse quickened. "What happened?" I asked casually. He sighed, shaking his head. "She misunderstood a business arrangement. Emotional people make poor business partners." Emotional people. That's what I was to him, a weak point in his story. I smiled sweetly. I can imagine. Some people just can't handle setbacks. He laughed. Exactly. By the end of the meeting, he believed I was ready to invest. He promised to send over financial documents. When I left, I made sure to drop a small digital recorder under the edge of his desk, a trick Laura had taught me. That night, I listened to every word. Dylan's voice carried across the static, bragging to his assistant about another easy target. "She's perfect," he said. "We'll get her money and move before she even figures it out." My stomach turned, but I smiled. I had what I needed. The next morning, I called Laura. It's him, I said. No doubt. She exhaled hard. Then we moved forward, quietly. We decided on a plan. Collect enough evidence to file a coordinated complaint with the state attorney's office. And if that failed, go public. But I wanted something more personal. I wanted him to see me before it all came crashing down. So I wrote him again as Clara. I've decided I'm in. Let's make this official. He replied within minutes. Fantastic. I'll prepare the documents. Dinner tomorrow night? I stared at the screen, my reflection ghosting over his words. Dinner. The same way it had started before. This time I'd be ready. The restaurant was the kind of place where every glass sparkled and every smile was rehearsed. Candlelight flickered against polished silverware, and soft jazz floated through the air like a secret only the rich could afford to keep. I arrived 10 minutes early, calm, collected, rehearsed. My alias, Clara Benson, wore a navy dress and confidence like armor. Inside, though, my pulse was a drumbeat. Every second brought me closer to the man who'd taken everything. Dylan walked in right on time. The same cologne, the same easy charm. He hadn't changed, not a hint of remorse, not a shadow of guilt. Only the same glint in his eyes that once made me believe I was safe. Clara, he greeted, taking my hand, his smile smooth as glass. You look even more stunning in person. I smiled back. And you look exactly like a man who gets what he wants. He laughed, delighted, as if I'd given him a compliment instead of a warning. We ordered wine. He talked. Of course he talked. About opportunity, growth, partnerships. I let him fill the silence while I studied him, memorizing every gesture. The way he leaned in when he lied. The twitch at the corner of his mouth when he exaggerated numbers. At one point, I asked, do you ever think about the people you've worked with before? The ones who didn't work out? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled. I try not to dwell on the past. The future's more profitable. I swirled my glass. You ever worry it'll catch up with you? He chuckled. Only if I slow down. That arrogance, it was almost beautiful in its stupidity. Dinner moved on. I played my role flawlessly. Curious, admiring, just naive enough. When he pulled out the contract folder, I glanced through it with professional ease. Laura and I had already studied his typical templates. The same clauses, the same traps. I recognized the signature line where I'd once written Kate Holloway. I made a note of every page. Each one would be part of the file we'd later hand over to the authorities. Halfway through dessert, Dylan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then froze. Just a flicker, but I saw it. His mask slipped. You okay? I asked lightly. He smiled too quickly. Of course, just business. He tucked the phone away, but his posture changed. More alert, slightly nervous. I knew that look too. Something had rattled him. When the check came, I reached for my purse. He stopped me with that familiar charm. Please, he said. I insist. I smiled sweetly. You always do, don't you? He grinned, not realizing the double meaning. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. He offered to walk me to my car. I agreed. The lot was quiet, shadows stretching long under the streetlights. As we reached my car, he leaned casually against the door. You know, Clara, I have a feeling this partnership could be something special. I looked at him, my face calm. Oh, I don't doubt that, for one of us at least. He tilted his head, confused. For a heartbeat, I wanted to tell him, to watch the realization dawn in his eyes. But it wasn't time yet, not until every piece was in place. Instead, I smiled, reached out, and touched his arm. The same way I used to. Good night, Dylan. He blinked, startled. I turned, got in my car, and drove off before he could say a word. By the time I reached home, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the thrill of it. The way his name had hung in the air between us, recognized but unspoken. Laura called as I walked through the door. How did it go? He took the bait, I said, and I think he suspects something now. Good, she replied. That'll make him sloppy. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't broken anymore. She was dangerous. The next few days blurred into meticulous planning. I spent hours with Laura, cross-referencing every piece of evidence we had. Contracts, bank statements, emails, photographs, each one a thread in the web he'd spun. Now it was our turn to pull. We created a timeline of his moves. Patterns emerged, new businesses opened, promises made, people left in debt. Each detail fed into our strategy. He wasn't infallible. He had left gaps, tiny, overlooked mistakes that made all the difference. I also refined Clara's persona. Emails became more persuasive, meetings more frequent. Every interaction was deliberate, every smile measured. Dylan was beginning to trust her, to see her as an ally, not a threat. And that trust would be the tool that undid him. The tension mounted with every message he sent. I would read his emails aloud to Laura, savoring the arrogance and obliviousness in his words. He's counting on us being naive, Laura said one night. That's why he'll fall. We decided the next step required personal engagement. Dylan needed to believe Clara was invested enough to attend a weekend retreat he was hosting, a showcase of his business portfolio, complete with potential investors. Are you ready for this? Laura asked. Her eyes were sharp, intense. I've waited too long, I replied. If this works, he won't know what hit him. We made sure the retreat would provide access to his key documents, the ones proving fraud, misappropriation, and repeated deception. With careful coordination, we arranged to have recordings and photographic evidence collected discreetly. The day arrived. I stepped into the resort with confidence. Clara Benson was radiant, poised, perfect. Dylan's grin upon seeing me was immediate. Clara, so glad you could make it, he said, shaking my hand like an old friend. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Throughout the weekend, I followed him closely, attending meetings and casual networking sessions. I asked questions, prompted discussions, and watched his reactions. Each slip, each boast was carefully noted. Laura coordinated remotely, sending updates and guidance via discreet messages. By Sunday evening, we had more than enough. Every misstatement, every falsified account, every promise to investors that had never materialized was documented. The evidence was irrefutable. Dylan was still oblivious, basking in his imagined success. He laughed at jokes, offered handshakes, and gave charming speeches to an audience that thought they were witnessing an accomplished entrepreneur. Little did he know, his empire was being quietly recorded. Each word, each gesture, a trap closing around him. On the drive home, Laura and I didn't speak much. The weight of what we had accomplished hung in the air. I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. This was it, the moment we had been building toward for months. Tomorrow, I finally said, voice steady but low, we finish it. Laura nodded. He won't see it coming. And I believed her. For the first time since losing everything, I felt a sense of control. Not just over the situation, but over myself. Dylan had taken my money, my cafe, my trust, but he wouldn't take my dignity. Not anymore. The end game was near. The trap had to be perfect. One misstep, and Dylan would vanish again, slipping through our fingers like smoke. I spent the next morning revising every detail: the fake investment proposal, the meeting location, the timing, all carefully calculated. Laura handled the logistics remotely, coordinating with a trusted legal advisor who agreed to monitor the entire process. Every phone call, every email, every handshake would be documented. There would be no room for him to wriggle free. By noon, Clara Benson was ready. I walked into the co-working space with a calmness I hadn't felt in months. My notebook was full of notes, the recorder hidden discreetly in my bag. Dylan, as expected, arrived on time, oblivious to the fact that every move he made was being watched. "Clara," he exclaimed, shaking my hand firmly. "I'm thrilled you could make it." His grin was effortless, confident. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice steady. Inside, I felt a thrill, the anticipation of justice finally within reach. We started the meeting with casual conversation, just as I had rehearsed. Dylan's charm was on full display. He spoke of projections, expansions, and future partnerships, unaware that each boast would be captured. He shared screenshots of previous transactions, laughed about minor mistakes in past ventures, and even mentioned Laura, not knowing we were listening. At one point, he leaned back, exhaling as if he were alone. "She'll never know," he said, referring to the latest partner he had duped. "She trusts me too much. Easy money." I smiled internally, hiding the surge of satisfaction. This was it. The proof we needed. Over the next hour, I carefully guided the discussion toward past ventures. Dylan, confident as ever, began recounting the exact methods he had used to manipulate partners. Each detail, the accounts, the contracts, the subtle deceptions, was captured on the recorder. It was everything Laura and I had pieced together over months, now confirmed by his own words. By mid-afternoon, I introduced the next step. "I think we should formalize this," I said, gesturing to the documents I had prepared. He leaned in eagerly, unaware that every signature he would make would seal his fate. As he reviewed the papers, I noticed the tiny shifts in his demeanor: hesitation, a flicker of doubt. He had been too confident for too long. Now, the mask was slipping. Every carefully crafted persona he had worn was beginning to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. I excused myself briefly, claiming I needed to check emails. Outside, I sent Laura a single message: "He's trapped. Everything is in motion." Her reply was instant: "Good. Now the final phase." When I returned, Dylan smiled, oblivious to the danger. He signed the first set of documents without hesitation. Each signature, each acknowledgement was evidence, a thread that would tie him to the crimes he had committed. By the end of the meeting, Dylan left feeling triumphant. He believed he had secured another investment, another partnership, another chance to move forward unscathed. I watched him go, my heart steady, my mind sharp. This wasn't revenge yet. Not fully. It was the setup, the moment where all the pieces fell into place. And once they did, there would be no escape. For the first time since he had stolen everything from me, I felt completely in control. The trap was set. Dylan walked into the conference room with the same cocky grin he had worn for years, completely unaware that today would mark the end of his carefully constructed empire. Investors were gathered, the kind of people who listened to numbers and respected polished presentations. Dylan had no idea that every word, every gesture, every boast would now work against him. I introduced myself as Clara Benson once more, confident and poised. "I'm excited to explore the possibilities with DC Holdings," I said, smiling. He nodded, completely oblivious. I'm thrilled too. You'll see, Clara. This is going to be a game changer. The meeting began smoothly. Dylan led the discussion, presenting projections, spreadsheets, and strategies. Every slide, every handout was familiar to me. I'd spent weeks analyzing them, and now I was ready to turn them into evidence. As the conversation progressed, I asked carefully crafted questions, questions that forced him to reveal past missteps, previous clients, and, most importantly, the fraudulent methods he had used. He answered confidently at first, unaware that Laura was recording the entire session remotely. Every statement he made, every admission was being documented. When I gently reminded him of a previous client who had suffered losses, his charm faltered slightly. He laughed nervously. Well, in business there are always risks. Everyone understands that. I pressed further. Did these risks involve misappropriating funds or signing contracts without proper authorization? The room grew quiet. Dylan hesitated. His confident mask cracked just for a moment before he recovered. It's complicated, he said, waving a hand. Business can be messy sometimes. I handed him a set of documents. Carefully prepared, undeniable evidence. We've collected statements, contracts, and records from former partners. Everything is verified. I'm sure you'll want to review them before proceeding. Dylan's smile faltered. For the first time in months, his composure wavered. He flipped through the papers quickly, eyes darting, sweat forming at his temples. The investors exchanged glances. Whispers began. Phones appeared discreetly on the table. What had seemed like a routine meeting had shifted. Suddenly, the reality of Dylan's actions was clear. He tried to regain control, explaining, deflecting, charming. But the evidence was airtight. Each document corroborated the others. The room no longer listened to his words. They read the truth before them. Laura, watching remotely, whispered over the call, "He's cracking." And he was. Minutes later, Dylan's confident grin was gone. He fumbled with his notes, stammering, attempting to regain authority. But every attempt only reinforced the truth. By the end of the meeting, the investors were pulling their offers, shaking their heads in disappointment and disbelief. The man who had once charmed entire towns now faced the collective judgment of those he had deceived. As he stormed out of the room, muttering excuses, I stayed seated, calm and steady. I felt a sense of closure I hadn't believed possible. This was justice, not quick, not cruel, but precise and inevitable. For the first time since Dylan had stolen my life, I felt free. The days after Dylan's fall were surreal. The world seemed sharper, brighter, as if the weight I had carried for months had finally lifted. News of the exposure spread quietly at first. A few local business forums mentioned DC Holdings and its founder's sudden disappearance from the investment scene. The investors we had warned followed up with authorities, and slowly the system started to respond. Dylan couldn't charm his way out this time. I sat in my small apartment one morning, the sunlight hitting the wall just right. Laura called. The official filings have begun. They're freezing assets, investigating past claims. He's done. I exhaled, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Months of fear, doubt, and anger finally began to dissolve. I never thought I'd see the day, I admitted. You deserve this, Laura said simply. All of it. I looked around at my apartment, the scattered papers, the unopened mail. My life had been in chaos for so long, and now, for the first time, it felt mine again. Not because Dylan had been stopped, but because I had stopped him. The cafe, my cafe, wasn't coming back, not exactly. But that didn't matter. The dreams I had for it, the lessons I'd learned, and the confidence I'd reclaimed were all mine. No one could take that away. I decided to start small. I rented a tiny booth at a local farmer's market, baking pastries early in the morning, selling coffee. It wasn't Kate's Corner, but it was me. Every cinnamon roll, every latte was proof I could still create, still nurture, still succeed. Customers came, smiled, returned. Their appreciation was quiet but genuine. I realized something important. Trust could be rebuilt, one small act at a time. I also reconnected with friends I had neglected. Marcy came by one Saturday morning, hands full of groceries and coffee. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I admitted. Some nights I allowed myself to think about Dylan. Not with anger, but with clarity. He had taken a part of me, yes, but he had also given me something unexpected: the knowledge of my own resilience. By mid month, I found a rhythm. Work in the market in the mornings, paperwork for taxes and personal finances in the afternoons, evenings spent reading, writing, or simply sitting quietly with a cup of tea. The calm felt foreign at first, but I welcomed it. One evening, I walked past a coffee shop in a neighboring town. It wasn't mine, but I smiled anyway. I remember the first time I had opened the doors of Kate's Corner, nervous and hopeful. That girl would be proud of what I had become. Not bitter, not broken, but alive. I finally understood what it meant to be free. Not because I had reclaimed what Dylan had stolen, the money, the business, the reputation, but because I had reclaimed myself. And for the first time in years, I felt complete. The market booth was only the beginning. Each morning, as I arranged pastries and brewed coffee, I felt a sense of ownership and pride I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the cafe I dreamed of, but it was mine, truly mine, in a way Dylan had never allowed. Word spread slowly. Regulars began to recognize me, returning each week for my scones, muffins, and espresso. I smiled, remembered their names, and greeted them genuinely. The simple act of being part of a small community, of giving and receiving trust, brought a satisfaction deeper than any business deal ever had. I also started teaching baking classes at the local community center. Sharing what I had learned felt like reclaiming part of my past and turning it into something positive. Watching people, young and old, laugh as they struggled with dough, seeing their pride when they pulled golden pastries from the oven, reminded me that success wasn't always about money or recognition. It was about creating, nurturing, and connecting. Financial recovery was gradual but steady. Dylan's collapse had triggered investigations, frozen assets, and eventually restitution orders. Some of the money he had taken was returned. It wasn't enough to rebuild Kate's Corner as it had been, but it was enough to provide stability. More importantly, it was symbolic, proof that justice could eventually arrive. Every step of this rebuilding process reminded me of something I'd forgotten: my own resilience. Losing the cafe had broken me temporarily, but it had also forced me to look inward, to recognize my strength, and to understand the value of self reliance. Evenings were quiet now. I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far I had come. No longer a victim of Dylan's schemes, I had reclaimed my agency. I had turned betrayal into knowledge, loss into opportunity, and fear into courage. I also reconnected with Marcy and a few old friends who had stayed quietly supportive through the months of chaos. We celebrated small victories: a new recipe that sold out, a class that brought in extra funds, a check from restitution. Each victory was a reminder that life, even after deception and theft, could be beautiful. Sometimes I thought about Dylan. I no longer felt anger. It had transformed into calm understanding. He had underestimated me as he had all the others, but his misjudgment had given me clarity and direction. I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about money or a business. It was about trust, purpose, and integrity, things he could never steal. I was creating a life that wasn't defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I chose to build. And in this new chapter, I discovered something extraordinary. The true measure of freedom isn't in revenge alone, but in reclaiming your own life, step by deliberate step. The first morning I opened the market stall after Dylan's final conviction, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. There was no adrenaline, no sharp edge of fear or anger, only clarity. I poured coffee with steady hands, arranged pastries, and smiled at the regulars who had returned. This was mine, truly mine, built from the ashes of what had been stolen. I no longer worried about Dylan or his schemes. The authorities had frozen his remaining assets, restitution orders were in place, and legal processes ensured he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. The world had caught up to him, and the knowledge didn't bring gloating. It brought peace. I had learned the power of patience and planning. Months spent gathering evidence, coordinating with Laura, and playing Clara had taught me that justice was most effective when deliberate, not impulsive. But even more, I had learned the value of my own strength, something Dylan had never truly recognized. The community I'd rebuilt around me was small but warm. People stopped to chat, asked about new pastries, or simply shared a smile. For the first time, I realized how much trust and connection mattered. These were victories more lasting than financial restitution. I began thinking about the future differently. Instead of chasing a grand cafe empire, I focused on sustainable, meaningful projects, teaching baking workshops, mentoring aspiring entrepreneurs, and slowly building a modest online presence. Each step felt authentic, grounded in my abilities rather than someone else's deception. Evenings became my favorite time of day. Sitting on the porch with tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I allowed myself to reflect without bitterness. The woman I had been, trusting, hopeful, sometimes naive, had survived, learned, and transformed. She was no longer vulnerable, she was vigilant, wise, and confident. I occasionally thought of Dylan. I didn't feel hatred anymore. I felt clarity. He had underestimated me as he had others. But in that miscalculation, he had given me the greatest gift, the realization that my life was mine to reclaim. The process of reclaiming wasn't instantaneous. It was built of small victories, finishing a successful workshop, making a loyal customer laugh, seeing my pastries appreciated by strangers. Each act reminded me that resilience could outshine deception, that integrity could overcome cunning. I smiled one morning as a young woman thanked me for helping her perfect her sourdough. I realized that every lesson, every trial, every moment of betrayal had led me here, to a life more authentic and fulfilling than I had ever imagined. I was free, not because Dylan was defeated, but because I had reclaimed myself. And that I realized was the ultimate victory. It was a quiet morning, the kind that carries the promise of ordinary life. I walked past the corner where my old cafe had once stood. A new sign hung above the door, cheerful and unfamiliar. For a fleeting moment, a pang of nostalgia hit me, but it wasn't regret. Not anymore. I had come full circle. The woman Dylan had underestimated, the one he thought he could manipulate and discard, was no longer the same. I had faced loss, betrayal, and fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my own life. The market booth had become a steady part of my routine. Customers smiled, returning week after week. I greeted each one with a warmth I hadn't realized I had missed in months. It wasn't a grand empire, and it wasn't meant to be. It was real, tangible, and entirely mine. I thought about Dylan sometimes, the man who had taken my savings, my trust, and my dream. He was gone from my life now, stripped of the power he once wielded so easily. Justice had been served, quietly but decisively. I didn't need to gloat to remind him of his failures. Life itself had done that for me. Laura and I met occasionally, sharing stories of our progress and laughter over the months of planning and execution. Without her, I would never have had the strength or strategy to confront him. Together, we had turned anger into action, betrayal into evidence, and despair into empowerment. I had learned lessons I would carry forever: to trust cautiously, to observe carefully, and most importantly, to never allow someone else to define my worth or destiny. I understood now that freedom wasn't merely escaping harm, it was reclaiming agency, taking ownership of my choices, and shaping my future deliberately. One afternoon, as I prepared a tray of freshly baked croissants, a young woman approached my booth. She looked hesitant, then smiled shyly. "Excuse me," she said. "I just wanted to say your pastries are amazing. And thank you. You inspire me." Her words hit me with a quiet force. Inspiration. I had survived, thrived, and now, even in this small corner of the world, I could give something back. Confidence, hope, a model of resilience. I smiled, handing her a warm croissant. "Thank you, that means a lot." Later, walking home, the sun warm on my back, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't thought possible. The chapters of my life with Dylan were closed. The pain had been real, the struggle intense, but the victory was mine in a way that money or revenge alone could never deliver. I thought of Kate, the girl who had trusted too easily, and smiled. She had survived and grown into someone far stronger than she had ever imagined. I was free. I was whole. And the life I now lived was fully, beautifully, irrevocably mine. Irrevocably.